The Pittsburgh Steelers began diving into the XFL pool, and I think there's two more moves to be made. But for right now, let's talk about the ones that have already happened. What's going on, everybody? I'm Noah Strackbein. Thank you for jumping on to Steelers to Go, your daily to go cup of Pittsburgh Steelers news and analysis. Find us on youtube.com/all Steelers talk and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. Today, we're talking about the XFL moves that the Steelers have already made and those that I believe they can continue to make from the spring football leagues. They started with Luke Barku, a cornerback out of the XFL who's only 24 years old, had one interception this past season, and is a guy that's going to come in here and compete for the slot position. I don't know what type of carryover this guy is going to bring with him. It's tough to examine an XFL player at all because you look at these guys and say there was a reason that you shined here, but there also has to be a reason that you didn't shine in the NFL. Barku has played on NFL teams before, spending time with the New York Jets and the Jacksonville Jaguars, but never doing anything in an actual NFL game. Afterwards, he headed to the San Antonio Brahmas, had an interception, 31 tackles, and a sack this season. Again, he's only 24 years old, and the Steelers are going to look at this guy and say, hey, there's an opportunity for him to return and revive his career, showcase that he could play in the NFL and do so with us. We have an open slot position. He's going to compete with Chandon Sullivan, Duke Dawson, maybe a little bit of Patrick Peterson to see his capabilities in the slot. From there, they'll decide if he's worthy of returning to the NFL. But it's tough to say for a corner who hasn't shined in the NFL. It's also tough to say that he won't make it when he's just 24 years old. And if everybody's talking about names, and Sam Darnold's the big one this offseason. Well, Sam Darnold's only 25 years old. Maybe he just needs more time to develop. Maybe this is the year that he turns it around. That's definitely the case for a lot of guys. Maybe that's the case for some of these XFL guys, aka Luke Barku. The other one, Hakeem Butler, that we already talked about, is St. Louis Battlehawks, led the XFL in touchdowns with 8 this past season. He had 51 pass receptions, 599 yards. He was the big name. He was the guy that the Steelers had their eyes on. They wanted him to come to rookie minicamp. He was unable to. Because of that, there was a bunch of questions of whether or not this guy was actually going to sign with the team. He decided to. The terms have been agreed to. The contract has been inked. The Steelers haven't been able or haven't announced it yet, but the XFL has. So in that case, I'm going to take it as official. Butler comes in here and there's a lot of hype around it. I get that. There's a lot of high expectations for anybody who comes into Pittsburgh as a wide receiver because it's a splash position. It's a flashy name. It's an exciting addition. I totally get that. It's tough to say that Hakeem Butler has a spot on the roster right now, and he definitely has to earn one. You look at this as a guy who's going to come in here and have the potential and a possibility to compete for the slot position, but he's going to have to outbeat somebody. You know, Gunnar Olszewski's going to have to lose a roster spot. Miles Boykin might have to lose a roster spot. You got to beat out Anthony Miller, Jamarcus Bradley, Dez Fitzpatrick, Jordan Byrd. You have to come in here and showcase that you are the 5th best receiver on this team, the 6th best receiver on this team, if you're going to earn an active roster spot off of the XFL if you're Hakeem Butler. Do I think it's possible? 100%. He's a big body who could play in the slot, and that's who the Steelers have been looking for. He matches up with Allen Robinson very, very well, and he's a complement to Calvin Austin, who's also going to play the slot. I think special teams is going to be a huge thing for this guy. If he's able to play special teams well, he's got an upper hand over a lot of these smaller dudes. And at the same time, if he could catch some passes and be a red zone threat as well, maybe he's got his upper hand over guys like Gunnar Olszewski and maybe even Miles Boykin. I don't know. At this point, I think that it's a 50-50 shot this guy makes the roster. It's an exciting name. It's a cool name to have. A guarantee, a lock. I'm not ready to say that just yet. Now let's move on to who the Steelers could also bring in. And there's 2 big names. One of them from the XFL, one of them from the USFL that I think the Steelers could add to both the offense and the defense this spring to return to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Both of them have already spent time in Pittsburgh. They've both impressed at different points in their career, and I think they have an opportunity to do so again. The first one is Mark Gilbert out of the USFL, a Pittsburgh Mauler who is the top corner in the USFL, and I think maybe hands down at that position. So far, he's just 25 years old, so still very young, has spent time with the Steelers before, ended up on their practice squad before signing with the Detroit Lions and then heading to the USFL. So he's got starting experience in the NFL. This season, he's got 10 interceptions, or 2 interceptions, 10 pass breakups, 19 tackles, and he's even had a couple of big hits. Very impressive. The other one, Tyler Vaughns, preseason hero, training camp All-American, whatever you want to say about him. The guy shined all summer long in and out of games, which I think is a big one. You talk a lot about guys who impress during training camp and then show up in preseason and they're not able to do anything, or the regular season rolls around and they're just totally useless on the football field. There are plenty of those guys out there. Tyler Vaughns was not one of them. If anything, during training camp, he was slightly impressive. During the preseason, he was very impressive. During this past XFL season with the Arlington Renegades, a champion for a team who went 4-6 in the regular season and then ended up upsetting the 10-1 DC Defenders in the championship game. So that's huge as it is. He caught 31 passes for 302 yards and a touchdown during the regular season. And then in the championship game, had 8 receptions for 83 yards and a score. So again, it just shows this guy is built for big plays, big moments. The Steelers love that about him. The quarterbacks on the team love that about him. The guy shined. It was kind of a surprise that he didn't even make the practice squad. He didn't even end up back in Pittsburgh. I think there's an opportunity for him to come back and compete for a spot. I honestly think that when you look at the grand scheme of things, he'd have just as good of an opportunity to make this team as a Hakeem Butler. 2 different positions, obviously. One plays the outside, one plays the inside. One's a bigger body, one's a smaller dude. But Tyler Vaughns is definitely an option for the Steelers, and a name that if he impressed again, it's hard to say he'd be handed anything, but he'd definitely be looked at as how many times do I have to prove myself before I earn a spot on this team? And I think NFL teams, especially the Steelers, see that in guys. They see, hey, look at this guy's been busting his ass for a while. He's been doing this for a minute. Maybe it's time to give him an opportunity. He was one of Danny Smith's favorite players, so he obviously knows how to play special teams. He's a kick and punt returner. And again, he shined in the preseason. He shined in a championship game. The guy does not sleep in big moments. When the opportunity is presented, he comes up with big plays, and he continues to showcase his consistency. That's huge. That's something that 4th-round pick Hakeem Butler never panned out to do in the NFL. That's something that a lot of these guys coming out of the XFL and the USFL have never been able to do. The fact that Tyler Vaughns has been able to do it, I think showcases that he does have an opportunity to earn a spot in the NFL again. I don't know if it'll be in Pittsburgh, but I think the Steelers make a lot of sense. A team that is looking for that final wide receiver spot, who isn't looking for a big splash name, just guys to come in here and compete and see who their best option is. I think that's Tyler Vaughns. I think that's Mark Gilbert, who could come in here and compete for a cornerback spot with James Pierre, with Ahkello Witherspoon, with Duke Dawson, with Chandon Sullivan, with Luke Barku. And I think both of them have an opportunity to beat everybody out. Again, the XFL is a big question mark in my eyes. It's football. I get it. But when you're playing spring league football, you're playing against spring league football guys. That's hard to say that that's NFL competition. At the same time, until proven otherwise, these guys looked real good in the spring. And you got to give them a shot, because if they could translate it back to the NFL, a lot of them just needed more time to develop and showcase themselves. Mark Gilbert, Tyler Vaughns, Hakeem Butler, Luke Barku, 4 names that I think did so. And I think 4 names that if they all ended up in Pittsburgh this summer would be good additions to the 90-man roster.